I don't know if there's any question to whether or not Joe Biden's policy in the Middle East has done us damage, whether Joe Biden's foreign policies in general have done us damage. Let's go back to the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Let us discuss the Chinese weather balloon. Did we forget that we allowed this balloon to traverse the nation? Not only did we allow it, we never got the full story until recently that they knew it. They knew where it was. They knew it was coming, and their objective was to not tell us. It took two guys in Montana who happened to look up in the sky and say, Tommy, what is that? I don't know, Paulie, looks like a balloon. Tommy, that's a big-ass balloon, Tommy. I mean, I've seen some balloons in my days. I've had some birthday parties. That's a big balloon. You really are right. That's a huge balloon. We should call somebody. You know what? Call Billy down at the police department. He'll know what it is. He'll know what to do. And that's how they figured out there's a damn balloon that came from China. And they knew when it launched, and they knew how it traveled, and they could have shot it down anytime. Oh, but they couldn't shoot it down over Montana because, as you know, all the people would get harmed. Then you take a look at October 7th, and then you take a look at the Houthi rebels engaging in full-on attacks on tankers, on cargo ships, the Iranians doing the same. And all of a sudden, there's a question about who controls the navigable seas. I'm Tony Katz, as I said, good to be with you. Noah Rothman joins us right now from National Review. Follow him on the X at Noah C. Rothman. You write about this more than most, and following a lot of this on the national security side, and really a conversation about foreign policy in general. We have had agreements and disagreements. This was you, Joe Biden's provocative weakness. As I understand, Noah, you're taking the point or the position that the biggest issue with Joe Biden's foreign policy is that Joe Biden is unwilling to have a foreign policy that has any concreteness. Am I off base in your understanding?
I would amend slightly, because I do think Joe Biden has a foreign policy. It's a profoundly dovish foreign policy. I think he is, even more so than Barack Obama, committed to American retrenchment, by which I mean withdrawing from a lot of the traditional commitments that the United States as the global hegemonic power has all over the world. That has been his policy, and that is provocative. I think he has demonstrated a willingness and intention and actually a efficacy in executing that imperative, just withdrawing from hotspots in the world or where we have obligations and creating power vacuums in our wake. And that is provocative. Geopolitics is a zero-sum game. That which we lose, someone else gains. And a lot of revisionist powers, Iran, Russia, a variety of other extranational groups, transnational terrorist groups, they see an opportunity, an open window. It's not going to be open forever, and they're making the most of it.
So this was an argument made, Noah, when President Barack Obama went on what many called that world apology tour, right? He's in Egypt and other places, and he's apologizing for America's actions. He's really apologizing for America's might. And the argument was that while maybe in the United States, that is seen as humility, in other cultures, other nations, other political philosophies, that is seen as weakness and something to take advantage of and exploit. I think we have seen that the desire to take advantage of and exploit Joe Biden's weakness, this same exact kind of theory, is going on in an unrelenting fashion.
I think so. There's something admirable and unique in the American character, that it is an anti-colonial power. It has always been one. It does not want to maintain and preserve foreign possessions, foreign entanglements, for the sake of national prestige, as much as a very cynical reading of American foreign policy on the far right and in the progressive left believe. The United States is not an imperial power. It has grand obligations across the planet Earth because we were bequeathed that obligation in 1945 as a result of where the powers fell in the wake of World War II. It does us no good to bemoan the obligations that we inherited from the British, for example, with regard to, as you said in the outset, preserving and guaranteeing the free navigation of trade lanes in the seas. That is the responsibility of the global hegemon. And the global economic market, the world market, which has only existed since 1991, this is a pretty new feature. It existed until 1914, took a big long break, and then came back in 1991 and has produced unparalleled prosperity and a dramatic peace, a peace that the world had never previously known. Go look at how many people died in wars prior to the beginning of this century and the end of the 1990s. It was a lot more than we have today. As much as we think the world right now is so unstable and there's wars everywhere and people are dying all over the place, that is an ahistorical reading of our current environment. Right now, we have an unprecedented level of peace and prosperity across the planet, which has lifted billions of people out of poverty. It's a miracle. And anything that comes after it will be suboptimal relative to our current condition. So it's the sort of thing you should seek to preserve. And Joe Biden has very little interest in doing that.
But it's funny that you phrase it in that way. We have less war now. Talking to Noah Rothman of National Review, you should check out his books, including Unjust, Social Justice, and the Unmaking of America. That's available at Amazon.com, wherever fine books are sold. Because what you would hear politically is withdrawal from Afghanistan, absolute failure, got Americans killed and left hardware by the billions for enemies to utilize. You could not deter Russia from invading Ukraine, and that has reached now levels of World War I trench warfare stalemate, that this is going to be a war of attrition involving human bodies that Ukraine has to understand that it cannot win. And now you have Hamas with the attack on Israel on October 7th, and through Hamas, through Hezbollah, and through the Houthis, you have the United States at war with Iran because Iran is at war with us. People would look at very askew at your statement that this has been a peaceful time.
Yeah, they're wrong. They're just wrong. I mean, as I said, it's an ahistorical perspective. Talk about World War I. You know how many people were in the trenches in World War I? Millions. There were millions of people in those trenches in the Somme. And there were millions of casualties in the First and Second World War. Tens of thousands of Americans died in Vietnam over the course of a decade. We've had nothing even remotely approaching that, to say nothing of conflicts in the developing world. Major wars between great powers has been something that was almost academic up until very recently, when it has become an existential prospect. Just if you look at only the body count alone, there's no comparison between the world of the American hegemony that has existed since 1991 and anything that came prior. And if you don't want to just look at casualty figures alone, you can look at GDP, expenditures, just the number of nations that are going to war with each other, nation states. Nothing compares. So yes, I understand why people would want to think that they live in the end of history. It's a narcissistic view. It can survive only by discounting the record that we all inherited. And it actually exists to justify a lot of, I think, dangerous policy prescriptions that recommend, indeed, support the kind of retrenchment that Joe Biden is engaged in now. This is not a democratic phenomenon. There are plenty of Republicans. In fact, the oldest species of republicanism prior to the Reagan Revolution was a quasi-isolationism that regarded America's oceans as a guarantee of our ability to remain distant from foreign obligations. It's not weird for Americans to retreat to that point of view. It's just wrong.
Talking to Noah Rothman of National Review, this idea of America as the hegemonic power. I'm going to try and rephrase that a little bit.
I can define it. I can define it in terms that are like concrete.
Let's start there. Let's start there, and we'll see where we go.
Global hegemony means the United States is the sole superpower, hyperpower, we used to say, right in the wake of the end of the Cold War, because the United States is the only power on the planet that is capable of projecting sustained force, sustained meaning over the course of months, even years, on the other side of the planet to a degree that would affect the kind of foreign policy outcomes that we would want to see. Like, for example, remaking the face of a nation state. The French can kind of do that. The British can kind of do that. Not really in a sustained way. The Chinese and the Russians can project power across their borders. Can they project power across the planet Earth? No, they cannot. So that's what I mean by global hegemony.
Well, let's now take it maybe as it's seen under Biden, because there is no projection. And what we have seen from the Houthi rebels in being able to take cargo ships, take people prisoner, actually kidnap people. And these are not cave dwellers. These are well sophisticated, planned out attacks and the drops from helicopters and everything else. You're saying that what Biden believes is in this dovish point of view, that a level of diplomacy can actually bring these things to heel, and that is the show of American might, as opposed to actual American might, which he's engaged in now with the United Kingdom in 8 separate air raids, if you will, against the Houthis in Yemen that have produced 0 results. So when does he learn that the dovish approach is a valueless one? And have we shown that the hawkish approach has changed anything?
Well, I think it's too early to judge what the hawkish approach is. I mean, we do have some signs right now that degrading the Houthis' capability to project power into the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea are actually degrading their ability to project power. It's kind of what you would expect. Whether it degrades their willingness to engage in these kind of piratical attacks, for example, and attacks on shipping is another matter. They are well equipped from Iran, and they show every indication of willing to expend all the ordnance that they've been bequeathed by their Iranian sponsors. That's something that we can do something about by taking those ordinances out. We can't necessarily degrade their ability to execute these attacks if they want to execute them, unless we were willing to put boots on the ground in Yemen. We're not. But we can partially neutralize the threat to a degree that they just can't execute it. But the Biden administration will be unwilling to do what I think it needs to do, which is to impose more caution on their sponsors and stop the tempo of events, not just in Yemen, but in Syria and Iraq, where U.S. troops and U.S. positions have been under sustained attack since 10/7. Or this is an Iranian campaign, began on 10/7 with, as you say, their proxy and Hamas. And the only proxy that has been relatively quiet, and I say relatively advisedly, is Hezbollah. And only because we've parked so many naval assets off the coast of the Levant in order to deter them. Deterrence isn't necessarily working against Iran, but it can, and it usually does when you hit them in the face. Ronald Reagan dropped a series of Iranian warships at the bottom of the Persian Gulf in the 1980s. Donald Trump executed the strike on Soleimani in 2020, and in both occasions, you saw movement from the Iranians that communicate their willingness to de-escalate while just doing some face-saving maneuvers, like throwing some rockets at us. But it is nevertheless a de-escalatory posture. There are elements in the Iranian regime that know that if they got into a direct conflict with the United States, the Iranian regime would cease to exist. They don't want that. So they do exercise some caution when the costs of their campaigns become higher than they're willing to absorb. Right now, the benefits of this campaign is to force the United States to move assets around, to demonstrate that they can close off the Suez Canal to commerce whenever they want. Those are a lot of really tangible benefits for the regime. Until we raise the costs, this is going to continue.
This is my point, that all of these actions, the idea that we can punch them in the face and make it stop, is predicated on the idea that we're willing to punch them in the face, and Joe Biden isn't. Thus, I discuss a weak foreign policy. Of course, they clearly do feel that they are emboldened and capable, and it is more than just the United States here. It is the world allowing this to happen. So when we go back to this concept that you bring up about being the world hegemonic power, I think the only question left is, are we really, based on this philosophy, which seems to not only exist within Biden world, but also exists in serious pockets of the political right?
Yeah, I think if I'd be very charitable, I do think there's an admirable quality to Americans generally who are reluctant to engage in the kind of behaviors and activities that we need to engage in order to preserve American geopolitical dominance. I don't think Americans really like having geopolitical dominance. They certainly don't like having obligations abroad, and they don't like being an imperial power. That's good. I mean, that's something that is noble and inherent in the American character. And I don't want to be too abstract about it because I disagree with it, but it is nevertheless a laudable disposition. Problem is that no other American adversary, either our near peer competitors or rogue states like Iran and North Korea, share that objective or that enterprise. And they make no bones about their willingness to coordinate in the open directly in the form of military exercises, selling each other arms, supporting each other's enterprises, supporting each other's destabilizing activities. They're all engaged in one mission, very overtly, even explicitly, to put an end to the age of American dominance. After that, they can work out all the problems that they have behind the scenes. But the first task is get rid of the United States, make it retrench, make it withdraw behind its borders, sacrifice its allies, an ally here, an interest there, an objective there, and all of it culminates in the end of the Pax Americana. That's not something Americans should look forward to. The world that awaits us on the other side of that looks a lot like the world that we got a glimpse of on 10/7.